Hey guys, this is James Cave, and I am with attorney Nick Paladian. Nick is an attorney with the Legal Rights Center. Welcome back, Nick.
James, good to see you.
So, a lot of questions about jury selection. Could you take us through briefly the regular jury selection process? Forget the Derek Chauvin case, forget this case, just under normal circumstance, what would jury selection look like, and how many jurors, and how does that work?
Yeah, so under ordinary circumstances, outside of the Derek Chauvin case and outside of COVID, putting those two aside, jury selection typically starts with a larger group of folks. In a felony case, it's usually about 22 people, random people. They're selected from voting registration lists and drivers/state ID lists, right, within that county. So in a felony trial, you have 12 jurors who wind up actually going back and making a decision. For misdemeanor and gross misdemeanors, you have 6.
Okay.
There can be some exceptions for both of those, but that's the general rule of thumb. So you start with 22 folks, and they all come into the courtroom at the same time. So imagine like a movie theater, you're all sitting next to each other, and everyone is there together. The judge asks the jury some initial questions. So the judge kind of opens things up. And what the attorneys have is some basic background info about each of the jurors. So like we know, their names, their age, their race, ethnicity, what they do for work, their education level, and some of that information about their spouses as well. But typically that's all we really know. So usually they all come in together. The judge will go through a bunch of questions, asking things like, the basic things about who you are, what you do, but then we also talk about, has anyone been on a jury before? Has anyone been called as a witness in court before? Has anyone been the victim of a crime? Has anyone's family member been the victim of a crime? Do you recognize anybody in the courtroom? Do you know anybody who works in law enforcement? Kind of all these, initial weeding questions.
Things that are maybe building blocks to a prejudice or a feeling one way or the other.
Exactly. Or if you know anybody, like I had a trial where it was a friend from college who was actually going to be one of the jurors. So immediately, he was out right away because it's like, oh, hey, yep, we know each other pretty well.
Yep.
So that's how it typically starts. So once the judge will ask some questions, then it gets shipped over to the attorneys, starting with the defense attorney and then going over to the prosecutor as well. So depending on the case, the attorneys tailor their questions a little bit more or less specifically. Like you've seen in the Chauvin trial, Eric Nelson sort of starts big and then kind of gets small and specific. So saying, hey, tell me a few things about yourself. When is a time you've resolved a conflict? How do you determine if somebody is being truthful or not truthful? Trying to gauge how they'll be in the jury room deliberating with other folks.
Sure.
And how they'll be sort of the judge of those facts.
Okay.
So under normal circumstances, everyone's there.
How long does jury selection take under normal circumstance? Kind of doing this, everybody's in the courtroom and general questions and.
Yeah, anywhere from a day to 2 days typically. It depends on the size of the case, but it can be fairly quick.
And then
judges like to move it along.
And I'm guessing this varies, but give us a ballpark. How long would and I hate that I'm saying this, like a regular murder trial, like how long could you expect that a regular, again, sorry, but murder trial would take place? Like how long?
Yeah, it really depends. And that's a phrase we learn early on in law school, and it just gets truer and truer the more you practice, but it really depends. I think anywhere from full 2 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks potentially.
Okay.
Depending on how many experts, how many, really depends on what they're bringing to the table.
Okay. Well, I'm asking you that question in comparison. So the follow-up to what I asked you before is, so this isn't a regular trial for a lot of reasons. It involves a touchy subject, white cop, black man killed. It's during a time of COVID-19. And so take us through the one question that some students had is, why is this jury selection taking so long? Which actually is probably going to take longer, but let's be general. Why is this one taking so long in the frame of, or in the lens of, the type of crime it is, or the significance of this case, but then also the pandemic? I'm
Yeah,
guessing both of those things have entered into the slow nature, or at least what I think is slow nature of this jury selection.
definitely. And we'll start. I think the easiest way to start off is just with the pandemic
Yeah.
aspect of it. So, for pretty much every type of trial, big or small, when jury trials are / were happening with COVID, they have been doing the individual juror questioning,
Mhm.
and that slows things down immensely, right? Doing it one by one is just slow and tedious, and there's no way around that. And part of that too is because normally you're asking some of these jurors the same questions together, right? So you're able to see people's responses, you're able to see people kind of nodding their heads or shaking their heads, giving some sort of reaction. So if I'm the lawyer questioning someone and I, ask James, if I ask you a question and you're giving an answer and I see the person sitting next to you sort of via their body language or some other, mode of communication, I can follow up and say, okay, well, juror number, 42, James said this, what would you do in that scenario? You can't do that when it's one by one. You have to go through everything, starting it over each time. So that just takes a long time. The other reason is it's a huge case, right? The media is just massive. Unless you've been living under a rock, you've at least heard about the case,
Yeah.
right? So trying to figure out and dance around, hey, how much have you really heard? Um, Everyone has an opinion. How can I wean out your opinion? And you're seeing a lot of rehabilitation because, jurors, for the most part, people, even if it's not intentional, people don't want to present themselves as biased, right? So you'll see an answer given like, using very strong language one way or the other. And it seems pretty clear what their opinion is. And the attorney will ask them, they'll say, oh, okay, yeah, no, I know I said that, but like I can be X, Y, and Z. So it's just kind of a more nuanced selection and mode of questioning, I think, just due to the magnitude of the case.
Sure. So getting back to COVID, so they're interviewed one at a time. And that sounds like it's COVID related. Are there any other COVID or pandemic accommodations or changes that we might see as this trial goes on, or maybe even so far?
Yeah, so you're seeing fewer people allowed in the courtroom, generally.
Like spectators or media, or
All of the above, exactly.
okay.
Yep. And you're seeing, from the initial standpoint, you're seeing the plexiglass in front of all of the witness stands, the attorney pools. Usually I'm able to just sort of lean over and whisper to my client without having plexiglass and a mask on, right? And same thing with the prosecutor and the judge. The jury box is usually filled with jurors. For the trial, they're going to be sort of spread out 6 feet apart in chairs, kind of back off on the side of the courtroom. So everything just looks very different, keeping in mind social distancing standards and doing the best they can to reduce the transmission of COVID through the air or other ways.
Do you have any idea? And I only know this from like legal shows and John Grisham. There's like, the day is done and the jury goes back into to deliberate, right? What I've always seen is there's one big table and a coffee pot, and everyone's sitting at the same table kind of arguing or mulling over the facts of the case. Do you by chance know how that I mean, that's got to be different too.
Absolutely, yeah. And that is actually, it is a fairly accurate description of what a jury room looks like. It's very small. There's a very long table, and there's actually a bathroom back there too that they have to use that one bathroom. So not a super comfortable place. Yeah, I think what they're going to do is put the jurors in a courtroom that's not being used, so they can really have that space, a courtroom or a big conference room, because you just can't cram 12 people into that teeny tiny room safely.
Okay. And then going back to the type of crime or the type of case this is, excuse me, how is that? Let me rephrase. I have heard that the jurors got a questionnaire
Yes.
before jury duty. Or before being called for jury duty. I've been called to jury duty 3 times. Never gotten a questionnaire. Is that something about me, or is there something different? I guess I'm assuming it's something different about this case.
They knew it was you, James. They knew it was you.
He gets no questionnaire, not this guy.
No, they're not super rare, but they're also not super common.
Okay.
They happen a lot of times in like sexual offense type cases, some murder cases, some sort of more really grisly cases, big nasty cases. They will do that.
Now, is it in this case, is it because of COVID to get more information ahead of time, or is it because attorneys, it's such a big case that attorneys want to already start vetting jurors? I assume they get the questionnaires and they're going through them, so they already maybe have an idea of who they would like on the jury or not like on the jury. It's which one is it, or is it both?
Exactly, it's both.
Okay.
Yeah. So with COVID, they were doing, because you can't have all the jurors together to really do it how they typically do it. They were sending out questionnaires ahead of time, and the attorneys would get them. I was getting them the night before.
Mhm.
I think these attorneys got them several weeks, if not months, in advance. And again, for that same reason of there are so many jurors, it's such a big case. They need time to go through and do those things, not only to be prepared, but to just save the court time.
Yeah.
Because if they had to walk in the night before reading, 50, 60, however many hundred, it just really wouldn't be feasible.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense. So going back to the question I had, and again, I hate that I'm even saying this. So you said, and it all depends, you learned that first day in law school. You said a regular murder case would go maybe 2 weeks to a month. And again, we understand that, it might be a little shorter, might be longer, whatever, but you gave us a ballpark 2 to 4 weeks. Is this trial going to go 2 to 4 weeks?
Definitely longer than 2. I would say if I were betting, I would say at least 4.
Okay.
There are, I think, about 400 witnesses on the state's witness list. Obviously, not all of those people are going to be called. We're not going to hear from all of those people. Some evidence may be stipulated to, meaning the parties just agree that this document or this fact exists, right? But even if you pare that down, that's a lot of witnesses,
Yeah.
right? And you're going to have multiple experts coming in. So it's just going to be a really long slog.
Sure.
And especially in a case like this, I mean, in every case, but especially in a case like this, the attorneys from both sides are going to be incredibly, incredibly thorough in both building their case and attacking the other case. So they're, estimating about 4 weeks. I think it will be at least 4 weeks, if not longer. We'll have to sort of just see how the pace goes.
Could it go 3 months?
I would be shocked if it went that long. I mean, I suppose there's a world in which that could happen.
But that's kind of, for us novices who know nothing about it, 3 months is just no, of course not. But it could go 6 weeks.
Yeah, it could. If there's, especially if some of these other, other prior acts are coming in that we talked about, that 404B, that could present more body camera footage being viewed. That could require more officer testimony, more medical personnel testimony, things like that. So sure. Judge Cahill, if you're watching it, as you've seen, he wants to run a tight ship, and every judge wants to run a tight ship, right? They don't want anybody to be there longer than they have to be there. So, he said 4 weeks. I think he'll do his best to hold the parties to that. Ultimately, it's going to be up to the parties to say, how are we going to present our evidence?
Yeah.
But you can be sure Judge Cahill will be kind of right behind them doing this if need be.
Yeah. All right. Well, Nick, wow, great information. thanks for enlightening us on jury selection, but also jury selection during a pandemic and jury selection in a trial of the decade, I suppose. So anyway, as always, we appreciate you. We'll see you again.
Thanks, James. Take
All
care.
right, peace.